In December 2015, there was a high-profile shooting in San Bernardino, California, that killed 14 people and injured 22 others.
Tonight, the nation grappling with what officials now say may be the deadliest terror attack on our homeland since 9/11.
The FBI was brought in to investigate the shooting as a terrorist attack, and they asked Apple to open up the shooter's iPhone.
Apple is refusing to follow a government order to hack the San Bernardino shooter's phone. The FBI believes important clues about accomplices and more plots could be hidden on that phone, but Apple says that complying with the government order could endanger everyone with an iPhone.
This conflict ignited a heated debate over whether it was okay to sacrifice civil liberties for authorities purporting to fight violent extremism. John McAfee saw an opportunity and jumped into the fray. Here he is on Russia Today.
The FBI needs to get its act together and tell the truth, saying, yeah, we need it because we want to spy on Americans. Cool. Let's talk about that. But please don't try to deceive us by pretending we're idiots. We aren't.
At the time, McAfee had been back in the US for more than 2 years after being deported from Central America. He was active on Twitter and appearing on television talk shows, trying to reassert himself as a cybersecurity authority. My colleague, William Turton, was covering the aftermath of the San Bernardino shooting for a news site called The Daily Dot. He says McAfee was inserting himself into the story in a desperate attempt to get attention.
He lied about the fact that he had a method that would allow the FBI access to the phone. So, he was presenting himself as a savior for this scenario, saying that, Apple didn't have to comply with the FBI and create this new standard, that actually he had found a solution to this issue.
William was confident that McAfee was lying, but McAfee was adamant. He wrote an op-ed declaring he would eat his shoe on a television show if he and a team of hackers couldn't do it. William decides to call him out on this claim, and he gets McAfee on the phone.
But I'm just curious as to why you did it.
Because by doing so, I knew that I would get a shitload of public attention, which I did. That video, on my YouTube account, you can check it, has 700,000 views.
McAfee's reaction surprised even William.
It was actually kind of refreshing in a way for someone to admit to their craven narcissism and not try and spin it as something else.
So my point is to bring to now listen to me, I'm answering a question. My point is to bring to the American public the problem that the FBI is trying to rape the American public. How am I going to do that? By just going off and saying it? No one's going to listen to that crap. So I come up with something sensational. Now, what I did not lie about was my ability to crack the iPhone. I can do it. It's a piece of friggin' cake.
William and McAfee go back and forth on the call. Eventually, he agrees to share with William how he would crack the iPhone. McAfee tells William that he should try it himself, and if it works, that William should write about it and give McAfee credit.
Check it out. If it doesn't play, say McAfee gave me a line of garbage. If it does play, say McAfee told me how to do it.
Sure, but I'm confused as to why you told me the whole method now, and earlier you wouldn't tell me the method unless I kept it off the record.
Because I'm assuming that since you kept on asking, you were not going to publish this. You are the liar, not me.
Nope, I never said that I wouldn't publish it. I explicitly said that.
Well, then our conversation is over, and you need to look at yourself. You need to look at yourself.
All right. Thanks for your time, Mr. McAfee.
William publishes his story. In the headline, he accuses McAfee of lying, quote, to get a shitload of public attention. He writes that McAfee's method isn't much of a secret at all, and that there's a good chance it would end up destroying the data they're trying to get. William also uploads the recording of their entire phone call. McAfee is even more furious.
After I published this story, John went on a weeks-long campaign to harass me and my editors that included hacking my voicemail. I woke up one morning and I had 20 missed calls from my own cell phone number. And I had one new voicemail, and it was from John. And the voicemail was, meant to be extremely intimidating. His reaction kind of made sense because the story that I wrote was damaging to him. It's extremely rare that I include the audio of an interview in a story, but I did that because I anticipated that if not for that, he would lie about the contents of the interview. The story, if I remember correctly, went viral and was actually really damaging to his credibility. He was not a fan of mine.
William felt that McAfee was a charlatan, forcing his way into the national conversation about a mass shooting. But McAfee was right about one thing at least. This move got him a lot of attention. You're listening to Foundering. I'm your host, Jamie Tarabay. In 2012, John McAfee left Belize, where he was wanted for questioning in the murder of his neighbor Gregory Fall. He returned to the US with a cloud of suspicion hanging over his head. But he was free. He was also broke, alone, and worst of all, potentially irrelevant. McAfee antivirus software had been a widely used product for over 20 years. And even though he didn't have anything to do with the company anymore, McAfee cashes in any way he can. He begins selling his most important asset, his name. Over the next few years, McAfee finds the limelight yet again. He exhibits his true talents, beguiling women, drawing attention to himself, and blatantly breaking the law. He also launches a bid for the presidency of the United States. The semi-serious campaign brings him shockingly close to landing on the US ballot. And it also introduces him to cryptocurrency, a new fascination for McAfee that would ultimately spark his downfall. For a time there, in jail in Guatemala, John McAfee looked like he was in real trouble. He'd entered the country illegally. His biggest fear was getting extradited back to Belize, where police wanted to talk to him about the murder of his neighbor Greg Fall. But ultimately, McAfee wasn't charged with anything by authorities in Belize or Guatemala. He was deported to the US. McAfee landed in Florida on December 12, 2012. He said he had no money and no phone. He checks himself in to the Beacon Hotel in Miami. Canadian filmmaker Francois Garcia arranged to lend McAfee some cash to tide him over.
Within the hour, John is on the street, and there's journalists waiting for him, and he's flashing. I've seen pictures where he's flashing out of his jacket the wads of money. And I don't know which publication, where'd you get that money? Is like, this mysterious Canadian friend. He made it sound like, it's a drug dealer or drug cartel or drug kingpin who just dropped him a bag of money.
Why McAfee needed to borrow cash is a bit of a mystery. At the time, he said his assets were frozen when he was fleeing Belize. And he went further to allege that the Belizean government had seized his remaining properties and accounts. But Francois Garcia says this isn't true. He sent us documents showing McAfee transferring $300,000 out of his bank in Belize. The first of these transfers is dated to November 17, 2012, less than a week after Greg Fall was killed. As for his larger fortune, we know he spent recklessly, and also gave much of it to his ex-wife Judy during their divorce. Whatever his access to money was at the time, several people told us that McAfee started this new chapter of his life completely broke. McAfee was casting about for what he was going to do next. The day after he arrived in Miami, he was sitting at an outdoor table at a cafe on Ocean Drive by himself when a woman named Janice Dyson walked past.
It looked rough, you know. He had on this suit that was kind of wrinkled and dirty. And so, yeah, you know, I kind of just kept walking. And it was actually the security that worked at his hotel who actually pointed him out and said, you know, that's John McAfee.
The guard explained that McAfee was the same McAfee who invented the antivirus software. Janice was a sex worker at the time. She walked back to talk to him.
And he was smoking a cigarette, so I asked him for a cigarette. You know, I just asked him, I said, well, what's your story? Who are you? Why are you, you know, what brings you to Miami? And he was like, seriously, you don't know who I am?
He assumed the whole world had been watching his flight from Belize after Greg Fall's murder. He says he's been on television for months. She says she doesn't watch the news.
I just remember thinking, who is this guy? And how was he able to, you know, kind of maneuver himself through this very dangerous situation, you know? So we spent hours, 4 hours just talking, and I spent the night with him, and we were together every day after that.
Janice was 30 years old. She said she felt a certain camaraderie with John. She'd been living in her own hell in Miami. She'd given up custody of her 3 children to her parents. She'd been unable to disentangle herself from an abusive and exploitative relationship. So McAfee represented a kind of escape.
We spent a week together in Miami. Then he asked me to come and meet him in Tennessee. And we were going to drive from there to Portland. So we're on this road trip, which was like 3 weeks. You know, we took our time. And really, that's how we got to know each other on that road trip.
What did you like about him?
Everything. Everything. He's just, you know, he's very smart. Obviously, he's intelligent. But also, at the same time, he's still very down to earth. You know, I felt like I could relate to him.
The relationship between Janice and John McAfee began as a commercial transaction. But over time, it became deeper. She says that by the summer of the next year, he asked her to marry him. McAfee spent much of 2013 living quietly with Janice in Portland, Oregon. She would be his partner up until his death in 2021. During that first year, in June 2013, he released a YouTube video that put him back in the spotlight.
Fuck. Send. Oh, hello there. My name is John McAfee. I'm the founder of the McAfee antivirus software company. Although I've had nothing to do with this company for over 15 years, I still get volumes of mail asking, how do I uninstall this software? I have no idea.
He's in a robe. He snorts white powder through a straw. There's a box labeled bath salts on the table in front of him. There are women massaging him and undressing him, including Janice. At the end of the video, she picks up an automatic rifle and walks away with McAfee. He told Business Insider that he made the video to parody the allegations about him in the media.
The greatest thing about that was that after that video, the headlines about me were vastly reduced. Because once you've accepted the fact, okay, God, he's been living with 7 women, okay, fine, let's get 7 women in this video and put them in scantily clad clothes, and I would be as decadent as possible, then what mud can you sling? I mean, I've already slung it at myself now.
This video came out 3 years after Intel bought McAfee, the company, for over $7 billion. But it had been more than a decade since John McAfee had anything to do with the company except in name. There was money to be made off of his famous product, just not by him. He wanted to reclaim his name. And he was about to do so in a very splashy way. We'll be right back. By 2015, McAfee and Janice had left Portland and were living in Lexington, Tennessee. He had some new viral fame from the video he made. The next step was rebuilding his fortune.
It all comes down to the idea of milking his name for its value.
That's my colleague, Brody Ford, who reported on McAfee and his business dealings during this period.
Everybody knows McAfee, the innovator. Everybody knows the name McAfee. So he's making money off speaking fees, hacker conferences, that kind of thing.
It was around this time when McAfee met an entrepreneur named Kyle Sandler, who was running a business incubator in a small town called Opelika in Alabama.
John was dirt broke when I met him, and I was paying for his hotels when he would come visit Opelika.
Kyle Sandler and McAfee became close. They worked as business partners. Brody says it was a beneficial relationship for McAfee.
He needed new customers and he needed a place to look more legitimate. And Kyle had this massive, kind of like what we would think of as like a co-working space, kind of a WeWork type thing there. And John was living in rural Tennessee at this time. So there's all these accounts of him driving down there in the middle of the night in an old beat-up pickup truck to meet up with clients at Kyle's incubator. So hanging around Kyle, it lended both of them legitimacy in different ways.
It would turn out that at the time, Kyle was actually taking people's money and misleading them about what he was using it for. A few years after Kyle worked with McAfee, he actually went to prison for fraud. We'll get into that more later. But for now, let's just say that willingness to deceive people was something that Kyle and McAfee had in common.
To me, Kyle understood McAfee in a way that a lot of other people didn't, right? I mean, they both were kind of running operations that relied on the confidence of others, right? I mean, Kyle was a con man at the time, right?
McAfee and Kyle seemed to work well together, and their partnership made the papers. USA Today wrote a splashy feature on them in February, and shortly after that, a group of investors from a company called MGT Capital Investments reached out. Brody says MGT had a pretty broad portfolio.
So they had started, like 20 years ago as a medical imaging company, and then they went into sports betting. They went into various kinds of tech. They really never made a whole lot of money. They were in trouble because their stock price was so low that they might get kicked off of the New York Stock Exchange. So MGT said, let's pivot. Let's do cybersecurity. What better way to drum up hype for cybersecurity than getting the famed innovator John McAfee?
So they called up Kyle.
I'm thinking, this is all bullshit, just like everything with John. But the next day they flew into Auburn. We picked them up from the Auburn Regional Airport and had lunch with them. And they're all talking, 40 million this, 40 million that.
The deal from MGT was significantly bigger than anything on McAfee's immediate horizon.
I think it's safe to say it was the biggest deal McAfee had seen since coming back to America. But he walked away because he felt like they were asking too much of him. He felt like the startups he had and his consulting fees would pay off, but he came to kind of regret that.
And I'm thinking, dude, you're stupid. You should have just taken the money. And so about 6 or 7 months goes by, and John is still broke, and the startups that he has are just shit. So we had decided we needed to do something to make some noise. And I had really just jokingly said, what about if you run for president? And he gets back to Tennessee the next day, and I'm totally not even thinking about this conversation. He's like, Kyle, I think I want to do it. Do what, John? Run for president. Are you fucking crazy?
To Kyle, running for president is an insane way to resuscitate your career, especially if you're broke and a major business deal falls through. But that's what McAfee planned to do. This was in the summer of 2015. Already, quite a few people had announced their intention to make a play for the White House in 2016. But it was months ahead of the first primary vote, and no party had a clear frontrunner. And in addition, that June, another controversial businessman without any political experience had also just announced his run and was doing shockingly well in the polls.
I am officially running for President of the United States, and we are going to make our country great again.
In the 2016 primaries, there was a sense in the air that people were more willing for non-traditional candidates, right? You had Bernie Sanders outperforming anybody's expectation. You had Donald Trump appearing and not fizzling out and actually leading the whole thing. And then among libertarians, you had John McAfee emerge. And a lot of people thought, well, no duh, somebody like John McAfee jumped in. I mean, that was just the energy in the air at the time. There was a lot of populist, non-traditional candidates popping up.
McAfee had a core fan base of hackers, and his name could draw a crowd. Kyle said they threw one of their first fundraisers at a strip club, which seems very on brand for McAfee.
Larry Flint's Hustler Club is like one of the biggest strip clubs in America. It's like 4 levels, elevators, girls everywhere. We rented the whole freaking thing. And you know, there was all kinds of campaign finance laws being broken that day. It took probably about $2 million in Bitcoins and PayPal. This was 2015 and it's 2022. No, literally, I'm trying to make sure that if there's anything that I'm about to admit that's crime, that statute of limitations is up, for real.
Okay, so Kyle is alleging that from the start, the campaign was raking in money and breaking the law. We haven't been able to confirm that. And there weren't any legal repercussions that we could find. The next month, on September 9, McAfee formally announced he was running for president. It was an immediate news story.
John McAfee has entered the White House race as a libertarian. He originally planned to run for the highest office under his own cyber party.
But he ended up choosing to go with the Libertarian Party for a number of reasons.
After Democrats and Republicans, they are the largest party in the U.S. There's a big difference. They do not come close, but they are the next largest. They already have ballot access in all 50 states. They have an established media infrastructure. McAfee wouldn't have to build his own from the ground up. So joining the Libertarians gave him a platform that he didn't have to build himself. So anti-tax, pro-gun, pro-drug, anti-regulation of any kind.
In so many ways, McAfee was the perfect fit for the Libertarians. He's a tech entrepreneur who brags about doing drugs and not paying taxes. He was well suited for a party that valorizes the image of frontier masculinity.
I mean, that's just his aura. He doesn't give a fuck. And most of the libertarians don't give a fuck, so he resonated with them.
In a matter of months, McAfee learned how to tailor his talking points for his new party. Even Darryl Perry, a longtime libertarian who ran against McAfee in 2016, was impressed.
And I was like, oh, okay, it's like, you know, just some celebrity guy that's jumping into the LP race because he realized ballot access is hard. But then over like the next 6 months, he started sounding a lot more libertarian.
By the way, Darryl Perry is best known for this viral clip of a response he gave during a presidential debate in 2016 while he was on stage with McAfee.
Should someone have to have a government-issued license to drive a car?
Hell no. What's next? Requiring a license to make toast in your own damn toaster?
I hadn't known before we made this episode that driver's licenses were controversial among libertarians. Here's McAfee.
I don't think licenses are required. However, if you are under 16 and your parents say you can drive and you haven't done it before, you should put a flashing pink light on your roof at least so we can get out of your way.
There was another question John had to answer repeatedly.
Candidate McAfee, everyone knows that something happened in Belize, but no one seems to have the story. What are you accused of? Did you do it? And how would this affect your campaign if you are the nominee?
Let me make this perfectly clear. Number one, I had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the murder of Gregory Fall.
The moderator you hear is magician Penn Jillette from Penn & Teller, and one of the best-known celebrity libertarians. Although McAfee was questioned about the murder of Greg Fall, the topic was treated casually. Incredibly, it didn't seem to hurt him in the debates. This is a clip from Fox.
You went to Belize. Police there accused you of unlicensed drug manufacturing. You were a person of interest in the murder of a neighbor. You left Belize, went to Guatemala, which deported you to America. You're still technically a fugitive, though they don't seem that interested in grabbing you.
People go wild. They're cheering, they're celebrating, laughing. Gary Johnson, the frontrunner who would later get millions of votes, walks over and kisses McAfee on the cheek. Libertarians were not bothered by the Greg Fall murder accusations.
McAfee's past was treated lightly. When it wasn't a bizarre point of pride, it was the punchline to endless jokes. Here's a clip from Full Frontal with Samantha Bee.
18 libertarian presidential hopefuls gathered to take on the tyranny of big government. They were educators, pro-lifers, anarchists, veterans, and a millionaire wanted for questioning by authorities in the murder of his neighbor in Belize after he fled the country in a disguise to Guatemala, faked a heart attack, and was deported to the U.S. While all uniquely different, they wanted the same.
Brody says that McAfee's suggestion that these murder allegations were pinned on him by a crooked Belizean government gelled with the libertarian ethos.
Their entire belief system is based on the idea that governments are corrupt, they're wrong. The idea that the Belize government was corrupt and wrong in accusing him doesn't seem far-fetched at all, so it really wasn't a problem for him.
In a few months, McAfee learned to breeze through libertarian talking points. He criticized the FDA. He supported withdrawing U.S. troops from overseas wars. And he promised to deliver real change in America.
I am a walking revolution, I promise you, with all of its drawbacks and all of its risks. The Libertarian Party is also a revolution.
Watching these videos, it's remarkable how comfortable McAfee is on the stage. He's charismatic. He's easy in front of a crowd. He was even sympathetic, like this moment when he casually mentions his new wife, Janice, during one debate.
When I came back to the States, my first day back, I was penniless. All I had was my jacket and my shoes. And I met this woman who was 30 years old, beaten and battered. She was forced into prostitution at the age of 20. I rescued her personally. I married her, and I hope she's watching this stream tonight. I love you, baby.
McAfee was in good spirits during the debates. Behind the scenes, he was making business deals. His presidential campaign and renewed TV presence were about to pay off financially.
MGT Capital, the company that flew the private jet to Alabama, they're coming back to the table. They want to hire him. They're dangling millions in stock options, a CEO title. They even want to invest in Kyle's startup incubator. So McAfee begins really talking with them about transitioning all the attention he got in the presidential campaign into doing another public company gig and, making millions in the process.
Kyle Sandler remembers leading up to the deal, the MGT folks told everyone in the know to buy the shares because they would explode once the McAfee news became public.
The MGT guys basically told us to tell our friends and whoever we trust to invest in this penny stock. It was trading at $0.25, and by the end of the week, it was $5.25.
In case you're wondering, yes, that could be considered insider trading according to the SEC. Yes, it could be illegal. And yes, there were charges coming. But McAfee wasn't worried. The deal went through in May. And here he is, bragging about it during another libertarian debate a week later.
A month ago, I was approached by a company listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and they wanted to know, is it possible to get our stock price up 50% within 6 months? Because if not, we're going to get delisted, meaning you're gone. I said, well, I don't know, I'll try it. On Monday, I took over as the CEO. On Friday, the stock closed up 700%.
MGT's share price explosion caught the eyes of investors and the mainstream business press. Here's Bloomberg TV's Emily Chang.
MGT Capital is an online gaming company that was once a penny stock but surged tenfold earlier this year on the announcement that it had signed none other than the antivirus guru.
It didn't take long for this to catch the attention of the SEC.
The share price explodes. Everybody involved in the deal gets rich, right? Kyle makes money, McAfee makes money, all the people they were working with at MGT Capital makes money. But then the government regulators say, hey, this company hasn't made money in 16 years. And they would later allege in a lawsuit against a lot of the MGT Capital core people that this was stock price manipulation, right? This was illegal pump and dump.
The SEC formally sued a group of MGT shareholders a little over 2 years later for pumping up the price of MGT and 2 other companies in a similar way. The litigation is ongoing, and today, MGT trades for about 1 cent a share, down more than 99% from its value at the time McAfee gloated about boosting the stock. Amazingly, McAfee and Kyle Sandler were never accused of any wrongdoing, and McAfee made millions in the deal. His salary that year as CEO of MGT, which was renamed McAfee Global Technologies, was $7 million in stock, and he may have made even more on the initial deal. The SEC filings show that Janice, his wife, had stock options too. The gamble of a presidential run had paid off. Kyle says this was the whole reason McAfee ran for president.
The whole campaign was a farce. It obviously brought everybody back to the table. They made the huge investment. Everybody made money that was part of it.
In addition to the MGT windfall, McAfee was also sitting on those campaign contributions. Kyle left the campaign by the end of 2015 to focus on his own businesses. 2.5 years later, Kyle was arrested for fraud related to his incubator in Opelika, Alabama. Around the time of Kyle's sentencing, McAfee was making himself out to be the victim. He posted this video to Twitter.
One of the slickest con artists I've ever met, named Kyle Sandler. I met him in Opelika, Alabama, when he was originally setting his business up. I had a business in the same town, and we became friends, and I got sucked into his scams like everybody else.
Kyle was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, but he was released early for good behavior. We spoke to him a few months after he got out. He now makes TikTok videos about his prison experience.
Hi, my name is Kyle Sandler, and I was sentenced to 63 months in federal prison for stealing $1.9 million from the investors in my venture capital fund. I do prison tips and more here on TikTok, so please do me a solid and hit that plus subscribe button right over there on the right-hand side of your phone.
He disagrees with McAfee calling him the best con artist, but not for the reason you might expect.
And am I the best con man in the world? No, John is by far. I mean, he could out-con me any day, and he has.
Kyle was done, but the McAfee campaign kept rolling, exceeding anyone's expectations. We'll be right back. Okay, we're in April 2016. Time is ticking down to the Libertarian National Convention in May, where delegates would choose their presidential candidate. And McAfee gets a new campaign manager, Tiffany Madison. She says she could tell that McAfee and Kyle were doing something fishy in the early days of the campaign.
There's an air that people have when they're grifters. And there was a lot of grifting energy in that space. He generally attracted Kyle types, right? That are con artists. They think fast, they move fast. John's very attracted to that busy energy.
Tiffany had been a libertarian for most of her life when she took over the day-to-day operations of McAfee's campaign. She believed his story, and she saw huge potential in him as a candidate. He was someone with bona fides as a businessman and who could appeal to the wilder impulses of the libertarian electorate. But she was shocked at the state of the campaign.
He had no idea what was going on under the hood of his own campaign. The website didn't work. There were no payment gateways to take donations. There were no donations being solicited. I mean, if I could just sabotage a campaign and then hand it to you on a platter, that's literally what was being done.
Tiffany also noticed that the campaign finances weren't quite adding up. The discrepancy started when Kyle Sandler was managing everything. Here's Brody.
Kyle doesn't dispute that the campaign was about money, right? He says that he saw about $2 million come in donations while he was there, and that includes in Bitcoin. Meanwhile, the campaign only disclosed about $50,000 in funding and $40,000 in expenses federally. That's way less than what other libertarians spent on their campaign. About less than a tenth what Gary Johnson spent.
The campaign took donations in Bitcoin. There's supposed to be transparency in a campaign. It's part of the whole process. But he kept the Bitcoin wallet on his phone. And we have no idea how much Bitcoin was actually taken, except for the emails we'd get were like, I just gave $50,000 worth of Bitcoin. So is the guy lying or is John lying? Who knows?
When Tiffany took over in April, she made a strong push to revitalize the campaign. But she only had a month before the primary, and her efforts came too late.
The Libertarian Party already has its ticket. Former New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson won the presidential nomination for a second time. He got about 1% of the vote when he ran in 2012.
McAfee came in third, but he wasn't bothered. The MGT deal had come through just 2 weeks earlier. He was a millionaire CEO again. He spent the day before the vote handing out his delegates to another candidate, Vermin Supreme, a man who wore a fisherman's boot on his head. Tiffany thinks that if McAfee's campaign had been run more professionally from the beginning, he had a real chance of winning the party nomination. That would have put his name on the presidential ballot.
They think that he could have won. That's why I decided to work with him because, give him a mic. That's really all he needs.
Several people close to McAfee seem to truly believe he could have won the ticket. Here's Judd Weiss, McAfee's 2016 running mate. He was a long-time libertarian who also barely had any campaign experience.
We were surprisingly close. McAfee and I would have been in the middle of that shit with Hillary and Trump. It would have been completely insane. That's how close it was.
McAfee never got that close to Trump and Clinton. But even if he had won the nomination, there were questions about how seriously he was taking the larger race for the presidency, even from the people who believed in him.
My belief is that it was a publicity stunt. I don't think he was really running to be in the White House, although he was saying he was. He was clearly living more of a libertarian lifestyle than pretty much any libertarian I know.
McAfee himself has changed his story a few times. 2 years after the election, he seems to acknowledge that the campaign was just about getting attention.
I had no intention of ever getting elected, no one in their right mind. I mean, I could never get elected president. However, running on the libertarian platform, it gave me a forum that allowed me to speak and to tell what I think the problems in America are. And that's all I asked for, and that's what I achieved.
Later in that interview, he starts talking about his new favorite topic, Bitcoin. He'd recently learned about it from his libertarian friends. Judd Weiss says he gave McAfee his first Bitcoin in early 2016.
When McAfee came on the campaign, he didn't even use Uber. He was still using taxis and stuff. He never used crypto. So it's not really known, but I gave McAfee his first crypto.
At that time, Bitcoin was worth less than $600. In 5 years, it would surge more than 100 times and break into the mainstream. But cryptocurrency was big early on in the libertarian community, which saw it as a way to subvert the power of government-regulated money. His newfound obsession with crypto would take over his life once the MGT money dried up, and it gets him in trouble with the law again. Kyle Sandler speculates that it's even the reason he lost his life.
That's when he went into the business of hawking shitball cryptocurrencies on Twitter, which is what ended up getting him in deep shit.
That's next time on Foundering, the John McAfee story. Foundering is hosted by me, Jamie Tarabay. Sean Wen is our executive producer. Brody Ford contributed reporting to this episode. Special thanks to Young and Eilina Peng for help with production. Molly Nugent is our associate producer. Sharif Yosef is our audio engineer and editorial assistant. Mark Millian, Anne Vandermeer, and Molly Schutz are our story editors. Be sure to subscribe. And if you like our show, leave a review. Most importantly, tell your friends. See you next time.